I want you to picture something for a second. And if you were driving right now or operating heavy machinery, maybe just keep your eyes open, but picture it in your mind.
Good disclaimer, yeah.
Right. So it is a January morning in the year 404 AD.
Deep winter.
Exactly. And the sun has not even cleared the eastern wall of the Colosseum yet. But you are not up in the stands catching those first rays of light. You are deep underground.
Right down in the dark.
You are standing in the hypogeum.
Uh-huh.
And for those who do not know, that is the vast, dark, labyrinthine network of corridors and holding chambers running directly beneath the arena sand.
It is a totally different world down there.
It really is. It is incredibly cold. The air is damp, and it is thick with this overwhelming, suffocating smell of caged animals, stale urine, and nervous sweat.
Not the glamorous image we usually get.
Not at all. And if you listen closely, echoing off the travertine stone walls around you, you hear iron clinking. You hear thick leather straps being pulled impossibly tight. And you hear the low, steady murmurs of men who know from brutal first-hand experience that talking before a fight is far better than thinking about what is actually coming.
That is such a vivid picture. And hi, everyone, by the way. I am thrilled to be here to unpack this with you.
Yes, and welcome to the show. I am your host, and today, our mission on this deep dive is to take you right into the heart of that underground darkness.
We have a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. We have got a massive stack of sources today. We're talking archaeological digs, first-hand accounts preserved in mosaic and stone logistical records of the Roman Empire.
Real hard evidence.
Exactly.
Right.
And we are going through all of these sources to strip away that glossy cinematic mythology you have been sold about the gladiator.
Right, we're throwing out that classic image.
Yeah, throwing out the golden muscled hero fighting for freedom and earning the respect of a roaring noble crowd.
Because that is just not what it was.
Instead, we're going to look at the gritty, bureaucratic, and deeply decayed reality of Rome's final gladiatorial games.
What is fascinating here is the sheer gap between the mental image you probably have of the Colosseum and the historical reality of what this building and honestly what the empire itself had actually become by 404 AD.
Because it was not the peak anymore, right?
Not even close. When you imagine the Colosseum, you are almost certainly imagining the roaring peak of the Roman Empire. You picture chariots, limitless wealth, a pristine arena.
I know, I always did.
Right. But by this specific January morning, the gladiatorial games are a dying institution.
They're just running on fumes.
Exactly. They are essentially running on nothing but institutional momentum. We have to remember that by 404 AD, Christianity has been the official state-sponsored religion of the Roman Empire for nearly 80 years.
There's a huge detail.
It is everything. The faith that governs the spiritual life of the Roman people explicitly condemns the killing of human beings for entertainment.
So they're doing this illegal thing, essentially.
Well, multiple emperors have already tried to ban these games by this point.
Yeah.
Constantine issued the first prohibition way back in 325 AD.
And reading through the notes we have, it looks like Constantine's ban was just completely ignored.
Pretty much, yeah.
How does an emperor issue a ban and everyone just shrugs? I mean, he's the emperor.
It is a great question, and it really shows just how entrenched this was. His successors tried to chip away at the edges of the spectacle.
Like, what do they try to do?
Well, maybe banning certain types of fights or stopping specific types of executions, but no one could deliver the final blow.
Why not, then?
Because the games were just too deeply woven into the civic DNA of what it meant to be Roman. Removing the gladiators felt to them like removing a load-bearing pillar from a civilization that, quite frankly, was already actively collapsing.
Right. It is tied to their identity.
Exactly. It is like trying to ban football in America today, but if football was also tied directly to your national religion and your political election.
Oh, man, that makes so much sense. You cannot just delete that overnight.
No, you really cannot without causing a massive revolt.
And you can actually see that collapse in the building itself, right?
Yeah.
Because according to the architectural sources we've got, you look up at the stands on this January morning, the Colosseum is half empty.
Barely even half.
It was designed to hold 50,000 screaming spectators. But on this day, there are barely 20,000 people scattered across the seating tiers.
Right. The upper sections, which used to be packed with the plebeians, are practically a ghost town.
It's just empty stone.
Yeah, the senators and the elite are still down in the front rows, sitting on their marble seats. but that dense electric energy of the past is completely gone.
And the structure itself is literally falling apart. I was reading about the Valerium.
Ah, yes, the awning system.
Right, that massive retractable awning system they used to shade the crowd. The sources say they used to have actual sailors from the Roman fleet operating it with naval rigging.
Which is an incredible feat of engineering.
But by 404 AD, it is just broken, the ropes are frayed, the canvas is torn, and no one is maintaining it.
Nobody has the budget or the expertise anymore.
Exactly. And those incredible mechanical elevators in the hypogeum, the ones that used to lift fighters and exotic animals magically out of the sand.
The trapdoors, yes.
They barely work. Half of them are jammed. The whole place just feels like it's falling to pieces.
It is the perfect analogy, really. Think of the Colosseum at this point like a failing modern legacy sports franchise.
Like an old stadium that is crumbling.
Or even better, an outdated piece of legacy software that a company can no longer afford to patch or update, but they also cannot afford to turn it off because the entire company runs on it.
Oh, that is a great way to put it.
It is a building that remembers what it used to be, which honestly only makes its current state feel even more pathetic. And the emperor at the time, Honorius, he isn't even there.
Wait, the emperor's not even at the games. I thought that was the whole point of the spectacle.
It used to be, but Honorius has not attended the games in years.
Really?
Yeah. He's a devout Christian, so he finds the spectacle distasteful. But more importantly, he's not even governing from Rome.
Right. He moved the capital.
He moved the court to Ravenna up in the north of Italy because it is easier to defend from barbarian incursions.
Surrounded by swamp.
Exactly, a swamp fortress hundreds of miles away. So he does not have the political appetite or the capital to outright ban the games and provoke the Roman aristocracy who still love them.
So they just kind of ignore each other.
Pretty much. The games just limp on. The infrastructure exists. The trainers still produce a trickle of fighters. The wealthy elites still sponsor the shows to buy political favor. And the crowds still show up out of sheer stubborn habit.
Which brings us to why this deeply matters to you, the listener, today. We are not just going to talk about abstract macroeconomics and architecture.
No, we have real people to talk about.
The sources give us 4 specific men who walked onto that sand on that final day in 404 AD.
And their stories are incredible.
We have Tetrades, a seasoned professional. We have Priscus, an aging veteran nearing the end of the line. We have Hermes, a 19-year-old kid who has killed 2 men. And we have Columbus, a condemned criminal with absolutely nothing to lose.
A really diverse cross-section of the arena.
Their individual stories reveal exactly what happens to real human beings when they are trapped inside the gears of a dying societal machine.
To truly understand how far that machine had broken down by the time those 4 men strapped on their armor, we need to contrast it with the absolute peak of the empire.
Right, what it used to be.
At its height, under emperors like Trajan or Commodus in the 2nd century, the Colosseum was the epicenter of Roman public life.
It was the main event.
When Trajan celebrated his military victories in Dacia in 107 AD, he did not just throw a weekend event, he hosted 123 days of continuous games.
123 days.
Continuous. We are talking about 10,000 gladiators and 11,000 animals.
Okay, let's unpack this. 10,000 gladiators and 11,000 animals. Just the sheer logistics of moving that much meat and blood through a city center in the ancient world is staggering.
It is hard to even conceptualize.
How do they even pull that off?
It was a monumental feat of logistics. And it was not just for entertainment. It was a massive political statement.
A flex, basically.
The ultimate flex. The sheer scale of the bloodshed was meant to demonstrate the limitless scale of the emperor's global power. Rome used to import rhinos, elephants, tigers, and lions from the deepest corners of Africa and Asia.
We're bringing in the exotic world to the citizens.
Exactly. They had entire shipping fleets dedicated solely to animal transport. But by 404 AD, Roman control over those distant provinces is crumbling.
Oh, borders are closing in.
The trade routes are completely severed, so the wild beast hunts, the Venetians are now just whatever cheap local animal that the organizers can scrape together.
So what are they using instead?
We are talking bears from the local mountains, wild boars, maybe some deer.
Deer. That does not seem very thrilling.
It went from showcasing the exotic edges of the known world to essentially watching guys fight local woodland creatures.
And the gladiator schools themselves reflected that same collapse. I was reading about the Ludus Magnus.
The great training facility.
Right next to the Colosseum that had a subterranean tunnel connecting straight to the arena.
So they did not even have to walk through the streets.
By 404, it is basically a ghost town. The elite trainers, the lanistae, used to be highly respected managers of incredibly valuable human assets.
They were like top-tier sports agents.
But by this point, their entire profession has dried up. They have been replaced by amateurs. It reads less like elite athletic management and more like shady, low-level boxing promoters operating out of a strip mall.
That is incredibly accurate, and this degradation trickles down into every single aspect of the fighters' lives.
Even their diets, right?
Oh, absolutely. During the peak era, gladiators were treated like high-value professional athletes. They ate highly specialized diets.
I saw the term horderie in the sources.
Yes, horderia, which literally translates to barley men.
Barley men.
They ate a massive amount of barley and beans, which gave them a thick layer of subcutaneous fat.
So they were not these shredded guys we see in the movies.
No, not at all. It was not because they were out of shape. It was a highly tactical biological defense.
Wait, a biological defense?
That layer of fat meant a shallow sword cut would bleed spectacularly for the crowd, but it would not sever any vital muscles or tendons underneath.
That is brilliant. It looks dramatic for the audience, but keeps the fighter functional.
Exactly. It is show business mixed with survival.
Here is where it gets really interesting to me. The medical care. The sources point to archaeological digs from gladiator barracks over in Pompeii.
Which gave us a treasure trove of physical evidence.
Yes, and they found that these fighters were treated by physicians using surgical instruments that rivaled the absolute best equipment used by the Roman military.
Top-of-the-line stuff.
Bone saws, specialized scalpels, clamps. Why would they spend so much on condemned men?
Because they were not all condemned men, and more importantly, they were massive financial investments.
Right, you do not want your investment to just die of a fever.
A good gladiator cost a fortune to train, house, and feed. You do not let $1 million asset die from a preventable infection or a poorly set bone.
It's purely business.
Pure business. If a fighter was wounded, the organizers pumped money into medical infrastructure to stitch them up and get them back on the sand for the next season.
And didn't the famous doctor start out this way?
Yes, the famous physician Galen. He eventually became the personal doctor to the Emperor Marcus Aurelius.
Wow.
But he actually started his career as a doctor at a gladiator school in Asia Minor.
That is where he got his practice.
That is where he learned human anatomy, because he was dealing with these massive gaping trauma wounds every single day.
But by 404 AD, reading the sources, that infrastructure is a shadow of his former self.
It is gutted.
The medical stations still exist down beneath the arena,
Yeah.
but they're heavily understaffed. You have less experienced doctors treating a much smaller pool of lesser-trained fighters. It just feels like everything is rusting.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the physical decay of the Colosseum is a perfect, terrifying mirror for the decay of the Roman Empire itself.
How so?
Well, in 350 AD, a massive earthquake severely damaged the Colosseum. And the repairs they made, they were shoddy.
They cut corners.
They used materials and craftsmanship that were vastly inferior to the original first-century construction. Entire sections of seating had to be permanently closed off because they were structurally unsound.
So you have this huge chunk of the stadium you cannot even sit in.
Right. The Roman Empire is aging visibly. It is losing territory to barbarian tribes. It is losing its tax base. It is losing its administrative grip.
And it's all slipping away.
And sitting right in the center of its historic capital is this arena, a crumbling skeleton of past glory.
That perfectly sets the stage for the night before the final games. I want to talk about this event called the Cena Libera.
The free feast?
When I first saw that in the notes, it sounded like a party, like a last meal to honor the brave fighters before they go out into the sand.
That is what the propaganda wanted it to look like.
But the reality described in the sources is so much darker. It was not a celebration. It was a cattle show.
Right. It was an incredibly cynical event.
So how did it actually work?
The fighters are brought to a public hall near the Colosseum, and they are fed a lavish meal right in front of the spectators.
So the public is just watching them eat.
Yes, but the crowd is not there to toast their bravery. They are there to evaluate them. Modern sports betting networks would have an absolute field day with this.
Oh, I bet.
Gamblers are circling the tables, they are looking at the muscle bills, they are studying the scars, and they are desperately trying to measure the amount of fear in a fighter's eyes to figure out where to place their bets.
So how did the fighters handle that pressure? Because we have 4 specific guys at this feast. Let's start with Tetrades.
The veteran.
Right. He is 31 years old, which seems ancient for a gladiator, and he has survived 19 fights. How does a guy like that act when the gamblers are staring him down?
Tetrades and the other veterans like Priscus, they know exactly how to play this psychological game. Surviving 19 fights in the Colosseum is basically a statistical anomaly.
It is into eternity.
So Tetrades sits there eating normally, drinking moderately. He is not sweating.
He's totally calm.
When the gamblers come up and ask about his scars, he shows them off. For a gladiator, scars are not just injuries, they are credentials.
Like a resume.
Exactly. They are a physical resume proving, how to take a hit, survive the pain, and keep fighting.
And he knows he has to project confidence.
They perform the role of calm professionals because they know that showing fear is blood in the water. It attracts a crowd that actively wants to see you fail.
And then you contrast those icy veterans with Hermes. Hermes is only 19 years old.
Still just a kid.
The sources say he is a retiarius, which we will get into in a minute, and he has killed 2 men so far. The notes describe him at this feast, and you can practically see the nervous energy vibrating off of him.
He is completely unsettled.
He is eating way too fast. He is laughing too loudly at things that are not funny. What is going on in his head?
He has not yet learned how to compartmentalize the psychological weight of what he is about to do or what he has already done.
It is just eating him alive.
He is a teenager who has murdered 2 people for public applause, and tomorrow he has to try to do it a 3rd time or die trying.
And the gamblers see that right.
Instantly, the gamblers can read that frantic, nervous energy. They know he is a highly volatile bet.
And then sitting in total isolation away from all the others, you have Columbus.
The condemned man.
Columbus is a condemned criminal. He is not a professional athlete. He is on death row. And he is just eating with this cold mechanical efficiency.
He knows exactly what tomorrow is.
The fascinating detail here is that the gamblers completely ignore his table. Why would they not bet on him?
Because there are no stakes. A condemned man fights sign emission without release. He fights to the death.
So the crowd has no say.
The crowd cannot grant him mercy if he fights bravely but loses. He wins or he dies. There is no middle ground to bet on, no nuance for the gamblers to exploit.
He is just a dead man walking.
He is just fueling a body he knows he likely will not be living in tomorrow.
That psychology of the night before bleeds directly into the morning of the games. Long before dawn, these men are woken up in their cells beneath the arena and led to the armoring rooms.
The rituals begin.
I assume they just threw on some leather and grabbed a sword, but the sources describe this as a hyper-ritualized process.
It is entirely a ritual. Over 3 centuries, this armoring process has been refined into something resembling a high religious ceremony.
Wow, really?
It is a precise, sequential strapping of armor performed by dedicated attendants. Every single piece of armor is fitted in a highly specific order, and the fighters do not put it on themselves.
Like knights being armored by squires.
Yes, they stand there while the arena staff builds the armor around them piece by piece.
The sources noted one very specific detail that caught my eye. The helmet is absolutely always placed last, which felt like a weird thing to emphasize. Why does the order matter so much?
It is a brilliant tactical necessity. Some of these gladiator helmets are massive and incredibly restrictive.
They enclose the whole head, right?
They have faceplates with eye holes barely larger than a coin. If they put the helmet on too early, the fighter is practically blind in those dim, torchlit tunnels of the hypogeum.
Oh, so they literally would not be able to see where they are watching.
Exactly. They need their full, unobstructed peripheral vision to navigate the crowds of attendants, guards, and other fighters right up until the absolute last second before they step out into the blinding sunlight of the arena.
While this armoring is happening, there is another layer of bureaucracy. The editor, the wealthy aristocrat, who is sponsoring and paying for the games, comes down into the tunnels to perform a personal inspection of the weapons.
The final check.
He is running his thumb along the edges of the swords. He is testing the weight of the nets and the points of the tridents.
And we should be incredibly clear here, this inspection by the editor is not ceremonial.
It is not just for show.
It is deeply, stubbornly practical. If a sword snaps in half during a bout because it was forged poorly, or if a net tears because the ropes have rotted in the damp underground air, it is a massive financial and public embarrassment for the man who sponsored the games.
Because he is paying for this whole thing to look good.
The Roman crowd is notoriously fickle and demanding. They expect a clean kill and dramatic combat. That requires functional, well-maintained equipment.
So if the gear fails, it reflects on him.
So the editor approves the weapons, ensures his investment is sound, and then leaves the fighters in the tunnels.
Leaving them just sitting there, fully armored, listening to the muffled roar of the crowd above them. Because the professional fights happen in the afternoon.
Which is a long wait.
All morning they have to listen to the animal hunts and the midday executions of criminals. They just sit in the dark, listening to the crowd warm up for their own potential deaths.
It is psychological torture before the physical violence even begins.
Okay, let's unpack the tactical art of these final bouts. Because diving into these sources, it becomes incredibly obvious that the way these men fought was not just mindless Hollywood hacking.
It was highly technical.
It was an incredibly sophisticated martial art. The first bout of the day features our 31-year-old veteran tetrades facing off against an unnamed younger fighter.
Yeah. Let's talk about the classes, because they did not just fight with whatever weapon they wanted, right?
Right. Gladiatorial combat was heavily regulated, almost like modern mixed martial arts weight classes, but based on weapon and armor types.
So you had strict categories.
They paired specific asymmetrical fighting styles against each other to create maximum dramatic tension. You rarely saw two guys with the exact same equipment fight each other.
It would be boring to the Romans.
It would be redundant. They wanted to see different styles clash.
So tetrades is a murmillo. The notes say that means he is the heavy anchor of the gladiator roster. He's carrying around 50 pounds of equipment.
That is a massive load to carry in the heat. He has a short-thrusting sword called a gladius, a massive rectangular shield called a scutum that covers him from his shoulder to his knee, and a broad-brimmed helmet with a distinctive fish-shaped crest.
He is a walking fortress.
To use a modern analogy, he is basically a heavily armored riot cop or a tank in a video game.
Exactly. And his opponent is a Thrax. The Thrax is a light fighter, a rogue class. He has a much smaller square shield.
So he's way faster.
Much faster. But his defining weapon is a wickedly curved blade called a sika. This sword is not meant for stabbing straight ahead. It is specifically designed to hook around the edges of a big shield and slice into the exposed arm or back of the opponent holding it.
So how does a match between a tank and a rogue actually play out on the sand?
It is entirely a game of angles, geometry, and resource management. You have the immovable object against the unstoppable force.
Who moves first?
Tetrades carrying 50 pounds of bronze and wood knows that physical energy is his most precious currency. He literally cannot afford to run around the sand chasing this kid.
So he just anchors down.
He fights from behind his wall. He absorbs the younger man's attacks, waiting for a single microscopic mistake.
And the Thrax.
The Thrax circles him, probing, throwing short, feinting strikes to try and draw Tetrades' massive shield out of position.
But Tetrades has 19 fights under his belt. He knows the trap. He knows the second his shield moves past his center line, that curved blade is going to hook around and find his arm.
He is not going to fall for it.
So what does Tetrades do? He flips the script. The sources describe him using his massive 40-pound shield, not as a wall, but as an offensive battering ram.
A hugely effective tactic.
The Thrax steps in for a committed strike, and Tetrades simply steps into it and punches forward with the flat of the scutum, smashing it directly into the younger man's chest.
It is a brilliant, brutal move. It rinds the younger fighter instantly.
Knocks the air right out of him.
And while the Thrax is staggering backward off balance, his shield lowered to Tetrades steps in with his short sword and slashes him low on the thigh.
It is not a fatal wound, though, but according to the analysis, it changes the entire physics of the fight.
This brings us to the brutal arithmetic of stamina in the arena. Fights were not over in 30 seconds, like in the movies.
Right, they were marathons.
They could go on for 10, 15 minutes of grueling anaerobic exercise under the Mediterranean sun. So blood loss equals reduced endurance.
And reduced endurance means you slow down.
Reduced endurance equals slower movement. And for a light fighter like the Thrax, whose entire survival depends entirely on speed and agility, slower movement equals a death sentence.
The Thrax tries to keep fighting, but you can picture his circles getting smaller as his wounded leg stiffens up. His strikes get more desperate, less precise.
The fatigue is overwhelming him.
The lactic acid is building up. Every exchange brings him closer to the absolute limit of his physical capacity. After 12 agonizing minutes, the Thrax lunges to Tetrades, catches the curved blade on his shield, turns it, and strikes the Thrax behind the knee with the flat of his sword, sweeping his legs out and dropping him to the sand.
And this is the moment of truth. The younger man is on his back on the sand, and he raises a single finger into the air.
The signal.
That is the universal gladiatorial signal of submission. He is yielding. He is admitting defeat. And now his life is entirely in the hands of the 20,000 people sitting in the stands above him.
In this diminished later-era Colosseum, the verdict comes fast. The crowd shouts and gestures, and they grant missio, mercy.
Why? Because the crowd respects the effort. He fought bravely. He entertained them for 12 solid minutes. He bled for them.
They appreciate the show he put on.
There is no honor for the crowd in demanding the death of a guy who did his job well. Plus, replacing him would cost the editor a fortune.
The economics again.
So he gets to live. He is helped to his feet and led through the Porta Santa Viveria, the Gate of Life, directly to the medical station we talked about earlier.
And he survives.
He is going to carry a massive scar on his thigh forever, completely unaware that he just participated in one of the very last professional bouts in human history.
But the leniency shown to the Thraex is sharply contrasted by the brutal, horrifying reality of the second bout.
This one is much darker.
This is where we see Hermes, the 19-year-old kid with a nervous energy, face off against Columbus, the condemned criminal. Let's look at the equipment mismatch here because it is wild. Hermes is a retiarius. The notes say he is practically naked.
He is. The Retiarius is the most vulnerable fighter on the sand. Hermes has a metal shoulder guard on his left arm called a gallerus, a padded sleeve, a loincloth, a weighted fishing net, and a three-pronged trident.
That is his entire loadout.
That is it. No helmet, no shield, no leg armor.
And Columbus is a secutor. He is heavily armored, carrying a large rectangular shield and a short sword. But his helmet is the really fascinating piece of tech here.
It is a brilliant piece of specialized gear.
It is perfectly smooth and rounded, specifically engineered so that a net will slide right off it without catching. Does not even have a crest.
Right, to prevent the net from snagging.
But the trade-off is that his eye holes are tiny, limiting his vision to a narrow tunnel straight ahead.
It is the classic matchup, the fisherman versus the fish. But the psychology here changes everything.
Because Columbus is condemned.
As we established at the feast, Columbus is a condemned man. A professional gladiator like the Thraex in the first bout knows that if things go badly, he can submit, and the crowd might save him.
He has a safety net.
Columbus knows there is no monsieur for him. The crowd legally cannot vote to save a condemned criminal. He is going to walk off that sand victorious, or he is going to be dragged off as a corpse by meat hooks.
So he has to win.
Because he has absolutely nothing to lose, he fights with a terrifying, unpredictable desperation.
Right, he takes massive, reckless risks that a seasoned professional would never take. The analysis points out that Columbus does not care if he takes a non-fatal stab wound to the arm or the leg, just as long as it gets him close enough to use his sword.
He will trade blood for distance.
Desperation is his only remaining skill.
Exactly. The tactical goal for Columbus is incredibly simple: close the distance. He has to get inside the long reach of Hermes' trident and force a messy, close-quarters brawl where his heavy armor and short sword will easily overpower an unarmored teenager.
So what happens when the fight starts?
When the referee drops the signal, Columbus does not circle or probe. He immediately charges straight at Hermes.
But Hermes is young and he is fast.
Yeah.
He does not back up. He throws his weighted net in a single sweeping practice cast.
He trusts his training.
The mesh lands perfectly across Columbus's shield and his right shoulder. The lead weights rack around his arm. Because of that smooth helmet, the net does not catch his head. The engineering worked, but his shield arm is hopelessly entangled.
He is trapped.
He cannot raise it to defend himself.
Columbus's momentum is still carrying him forward. His legs are free, but Hermes strikes with terrifying precision. He does not thrust at the chest plate or the shield.
He goes for the weak point.
He drives the 3 iron points of his trident directly into the tiny, narrow gap of exposed neck between Columbus's heavy helmet and his shoulder guard.
Columbus drops to the sand instantly, the sheer weight of his armor pulling his lifeless body down. And that is it. It is over in seconds.
It is brutally fast.
The crowd's reaction, their cheers or boos, it does not even matter because Columbus is dead, and Hermes is 19 years old, and he has now killed 3 human beings.
Just pause and imagine the psychological weight of that. You are a teenager standing over a bleeding corpse that you just made, and you have to raise your bloodied weapon to a cheering crowd as if you have done something noble.
It is completely twisted.
What does it cost a 19-year-old mind to process that kind of extreme sanctioned violence? How do you sleep? How do you talk to people?
You just don't, I guess.
The tragedy is that the arena does not care about his PTSD. It only cares if he can do it again next month.
It is a haunting image. And it sets this deeply somber tone for the third bout, which historians widely consider to be the last professional gladiatorial match ever fought in the Colosseum.
The finale of an era.
This is Priscus, our aging Thraex, with the scars going up against an unnamed, highly veteran Murmillo. Both of these men have survived countless fights.
They are the absolute elite.
The crowd knows them. And the sources point out that the crowd does not greet them with hysterical, bloodthirsty screaming, but with this deep, informed appreciation.
They know they're watching masters at work.
They recognize elite competence. This bout is not a frantic, desperate brawl like the kid and the convict. The notes describe it as a conversation in iron.
I love that phrase, a conversation in iron, because both of these men understand the sheer economics of survival better than anyone else in the building.
They know the math.
Every unnecessary step, every wild swing is wasted energy that could cost them their lives 10 minutes from now. So it starts incredibly slowly.
They're feeling each other out.
Priscus circles, lightly tapping his curved blade against the Murmillo's shield, just probing the defenses. The Murmillo tracks him, making tiny millimeter adjustments to his massive scutum to keep his angles covered. They exchange brief, hyper-controlled strikes and immediately reset.
It is a process of gathering data. They are not trying to land a killing blow yet. They are testing each other's timing, their reach, how they shift their weight, and how fast they are fatiguing.
And here is where the extreme technical sophistication of the gladiatorial arts really shines.
It all comes down to the details.
The decisive moment in this historic final bout does not come from some wild cinematic sword swing or spinning back kick. It comes from an accumulation of microscopic advantages.
Like a chess match.
Priscus, with his years of hard-won experience, notices a pattern. During the transition between a defensive block and an offensive thrust, the Murmillo's massive shield dips.
Just a tiny dip.
We are talking about a fraction of a second. A younger, less experienced fighter, someone like Hermes, would never even see it, but Priscus sees it the way a master carpenter sees a joint that is a millimeter out of alignment.
So Priscus lays a trap. I was reading the blow-by-blow analysis, and it is brilliant. Priscus feints high at the Murmillo's helmet, trying to draw that massive shield up.
He forces the reaction.
The Murmillo reacts to the feint block's high and counters with a standard thrust. As he transitions to the thrust, the shield dips exactly as Priscus knew it would.
And there's the opening.
In that split second, Priscus hooks his curved sicca right over the top edge of the huge shield and slashes down onto the Murmillo's sword arm, right at the wrist.
It is a surgical strike. He completely severs the tendons that control the man's grip.
Just totally disables his hand.
The gladius instantly drops from the Murmillo's hand onto the sand. The Murmillo staggers back his ability to fight, completely neutralized in one highly technical move.
He cannot even pick the sword back up.
He does not even try to pick the sword up with his other hand. He knows he has been bested. He raises his finger. Submission.
The crowd deliberates, but the verdict is obvious. Missio. Both men fought brilliantly. Killing either of them would be a massive waste of highly trained talent.
It would not be justice. It would be vandalism of a valuable asset.
The Murmillo goes to the medical station to get stitched up, though, with severed tendons. He will likely never hold a sword properly again. And Priscus walks out through the gate of life.
His final victory.
And as he walks into the dark tunnels, he has absolutely no idea that the freshly spilled blood on the sand behind him is the last blood that will ever be shed in a professional gladiatorial bout.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is crucial to look at what happens in the arena between these bouts. The Colosseum operates with this terrifying, extreme compartmentalization.
It is an absolute bureaucracy of death. Right? I was reading the source material about what happens literally seconds after a body hits the floor or after a fight concludes.
Yeah.
It mentioned these specific cleanup crews.
Yeah.
How did that actually work?
Yeah.
Because they do not just leave the bodies there.
Exactly. As soon as a fight ends out, come the Honori. These are the low-level arena attendants whose sole job is sand maintenance.
Just raking the sand.
They run out with rakes and shovels, and they furiously rake the blood deep into the absorbent sand or shovel fresh sand over the dark spots. They want to maintain the visual illusion of a clean slate for the next bout.
Wow.
It is a lie told in sand. It promises a fresh start, even though every fighter stepping out knows exactly what just happened on that spot.
And while the sand is being raked, you have another crew, the Libetnaria, the death attendants. I saw they were named after Libitina, the goddess of corpses. Their job is to deal with people like Columbus.
Yes. They come out sometimes dressed as the mythological figure Charon, and they drag Columbus's body through the Porta Libitinensis, the Gate of Death, and into the Spoliarium.
The stripping room.
This is the stripping room, hidden deep in the Hypogeum. Their job is to remove his armor, cut away his weapons, and scrub the blood off the gear so it can be reused by the next fighter.
It really emphasizes the cold economics of the whole thing. The equipment he wore, the smooth helmet, the heavy shield, is incredibly valuable to the arena. It is an asset.
It is worth more than the man.
His human body is entirely worthless now that the fight is over. The notes say once he is stripped, his remains are just loaded onto a cart and unceremoniously dumped into an unmarked pit outside the city walls.
The arena compartmentalized its operations with the cold efficiency of a modern industrial slaughterhouse.
Everyone has their specific job.
The physicians treat the wounds, the attendants rake the sand, the armorers fix the gear, the gamblers take their cuts, and absolutely no one is paid to contemplate the morality of the larger system. Everyone is just doing their small specific job.
But on this specific afternoon, someone does contemplate it.
Mm-hmm.
We shift to the afternoon. The crowd is starting to thin out a bit. The shadows in the arena are getting longer. And suddenly, a man stands up in the stands and does something that has not happened in 300 years of these games.
A total break in the routine.
His name is Telemachus.
Mm-hmm.
The sources say he is a Christian monk.
Right, and what is crucial here is that Telemachus was not a local Roman. He traveled all the way from the eastern provinces of the empire, likely from Asia Minor or Syria.
So he is an outsider.
He was not accustomed to this brutal culture. He did not grow up watching people die in the sand. He came to Rome specifically to witness this spectacle because he believed to the core of his soul that it was a profound abomination before God.
This raises an important question about the nature of protest in the ancient world. Telemachus does not circulate a petition. He does not write an angry letter to the Bishop of Rome or try to get an audience with the emperor.
No, he engages in the most radical, undeniable physical form of opposition imaginable.
He takes direct action.
During a preliminary bout in the afternoon, while two armed gladiators are fighting, Telemachus actually climbs over the marble barrier. He drops down onto the arena sand in his monk's robes, and he physically runs right between the two fighters.
He just puts himself in the crossfire.
He puts his own soft, unarmored body directly in the path of the swinging swords, and he begs them in the name of God to stop.
It is an incredible visual. The blinding light of the arena, the confusion of the gladiators staring at this unarmed man in robes. And how does the Roman crowd react to this? Do they have a sudden moral awakening?
Yeah.
Do they drop to their knees in repentance?
Absolutely not. They are utterly furious.
They just want to see the show?
They experience this not as a divine intervention, but as an incredibly annoying interruption of the entertainment they paid good money to see. Imagine someone running onto the field during the Super Bowl, but the crowd is armed with rocks.
That is a terrifying thought.
The reaction is instantaneous and violently explosive. Spectators start tearing up chunks of stone from the crumbling seething tiers. Remember, the building is already falling apart. They start hurling rocks, half-eaten food debris, anything they can get their hands on down at Telemachus.
And Telemachus does not run away. The accounts say he just stands there holding his ground between the gladiators as the projectiles rain down on him from multiple directions.
He accepts his fate.
The historical accounts of this are brief but devastating. The spectators literally stone him to death right there on the arena floor.
A man who walked onto the sand specifically to stop the killing is brutally murdered by the people who came to watch the killing.
It is such a dark irony.
He was not a professional gladiator. He was not a condemned criminal paying a debt to society. He was a monk, and he died in the exact same sand that had absorbed the blood of 400,000 victims before him. He gave the arena the one thing it always demanded: a body.
But this specific body changes everything. The political shockwave is massive. Word of what happened reaches Emperor Honorius in Ravenna within days.
And he cannot ignore this one.
Think about the political nightmare Honorius is suddenly facing. He is a Christian emperor running a nominally Christian empire, relying heavily on the support of powerful Christian bishops to maintain his fragile grip on power against military usurpers and barbarian kings.
His whole base of power is Christian.
He has spent years looking the other way while these pagan games continued in Rome using the excuse of tradition.
But he cannot look away now. A Christian monk has just been publicly martyred by a Roman crowd in the middle of a pagan entertainment ritual in the capital city.
The optics are terrible.
The optics are an absolute catastrophe for him. The pressure from the Christian establishment becomes instantly insurmountable.
So what does Honorius do? He is finally forced to do what Constantine and all the previous emperors lacked the political capital to accomplish.
He brings the hammer down.
He issues a permanent, sweeping, fiercely enforced decree banning all gladiatorial combat throughout the entire empire.
And while modern historians love to debate whether Telemachus was the sole cause of the ban or just the final convenient catalyst in a long line of changing social mores for the Colosseum itself, the debate does not matter.
The result is the same either way.
The result is absolute. The games shut down overnight. The massive underground elevators sit idle. The attendants put down their rakes. The greatest, most sophisticated infrastructure of human destruction ever built goes completely silent. Not with the grand finale, but with a piece of parchment signed 300 miles away in a swamp in Ravenna.
So what does this all mean for the men who actually survived that day? We know the game's ended, but what happens to highly specialized killers when their entire industry evaporates overnight?
They have to find new work.
The sources give us some extrapolated paths for these guys. Let's look at Tetrades, the veteran who survived 19 fights. He actually had some fame, right?
He did. In earlier eras, a guy like Tetrades might have become a wealthy trainer at a gladiator's school, a doctor passing on his skills to the next generation and retiring rich.
Like a retired boxer opening a gym.
But those schools are shut down now. The most likely path for a guy with his specific skill set is to enter the private sector. He probably became a private bodyguard for a wealthy Roman senator.
Think about the psychological whiplash there. He goes from being the star of the Colosseum, fighting in front of tens of thousands of screaming fans, to guarding a rich man's dining room door.
It is a massive downgrade in status.
He is using the exact same lethal reflexes that made him famous,
Right.
but in a totally mundane, unrecognized context.
Then you have Priscus, the aging fighter, who won that final professional bout with the incredible wrist slash. He was already aging out of the profession.
He was on his way out anyway.
The imperial ban probably just accelerated his inevitable retirement. He likely received the rudis, the wooden sword that symbolized his official discharge and freedom, and just vanished into the anonymous lower classes of Roman society.
What do you think he did?
He probably lived off his accumulated prize money, maybe opened a tavern, just an old man with an extraordinary history hidden in a battered body.
But the true tragedy, and the sources, the fate that is hardest to swallow, belongs to Hermes, the 19-year-old Riciarius.
Okay, with the neck.
He has 3 kills under his belt, and suddenly his entire profession is completely illegal. He is a highly specialized master of the net and trident. Those skills are completely useless outside the specific theatrical context of the arena.
There is no civilian application for a trident.
You might think, well, he's a killer, he is young, why not just join the Roman military?
Right, the legions were desperate for recruits as the borders collapsed. But military combat in a tight infantry formation is completely different from leaping around unarmored with a fishing net.
It is a totally different discipline.
The military would not want his hyper-specific fighting style. It would break their shield wall. So you have this teenage boy left with absolutely nothing but the deeply ingrained muscle memory of killing severe trauma and no societal framework to put it in. It is a tragic dead end.
And we cannot gloss over the dark, hypocritical irony of what happened next in the arena itself.
Yeah.
The human fighting stopped, the gladiators were gone, but the Colosseum did not close its doors.
Oh no, it stayed open.
The sources note that the Venetians, the wild animal hunts, continued for another 120 years, all the way until 523 AD.
Yes. The Christian authorities found a deeply convenient moral loophole. The Roman crowds still desperately demanded the spectacle of death.
They still needed that outlet.
They needed that release, and the empire still needed a way to placate them to prevent riots, so they just replaced human blood with animal blood.
Just a simple substitution.
The sand soaked it up just the same. The crowds cheered just as loudly when a bear was slaughtered as they did when Columbus was killed. They simply changed the species of the victim to make it morally palatable for a Christian empire.
Which perfectly leads us to the long, slow ruin of the building itself. Once the animal hunts finally stopped in the 6th century, the Colosseum was truly abandoned. And it did not just sit there majestically like a protected monument.
Not at all.
It became a literal quarry.
Right. As the population of Rome collapsed over the centuries, from over 1 million people down to barely 50,000 during the Dark Ages, the desperate locals realized the Colosseum was the largest supply of pre-cut stone in the city.
It is just free building material to them.
They systematically ripped out the massive travertine blocks to build medieval churches, hospitals, and palaces for the popes.
You know all those iconic pockmarks and holes you see all over the Colosseum walls today when you look at photos?
Yeah.
I always assumed that was from cannon fire or just natural erosion over 2 millennia.
No, those holes are entirely man-made. Medieval Romans painstakingly chipped away the stone to extract the precious iron clamps that held the massive blocks together.
They were stealing the iron.
They stole the iron to melt down for tools, horseshoes, and weapons. The Colosseum was literally disassembled by the descendants of the people who built it.
That is incredible.
The underground tunnels, the hypogeum where Tetrades and Hermes waited in the dark, were completely buried in dirt, trash, and rubble for 1,000 years. At one point, the building even became a neighborhood. People built small houses, stables, and blacksmith workshops right inside the arches where gladiators used to bleed.
And contrast that incredibly gritty, messy reality with what the Colosseum is today. Every year, nearly 3 million tourists visit the site.
It is a massive tourist trap now.
They walk through the arches with their audio guides, marveling at the genius of the elevator mechanisms and the sophisticated crowd management system, which, to be fair, was incredible. They buy cheap plastic gladiator helmets in the gift shop and take smiling selfies with guys dressed in fake armor outside the metro station. They look at the architecture as a pure marvel of engineering.
And it absolutely was a marvel of engineering. But we forget what that engineering was actively serving. It was an industrial slaughterhouse designed to process flesh. As one of our sources put it perfectly, Rome did not stumble into the arena. Rome engineered it.
The romanticization is profound. We have allowed the global entertainment industry to completely sanitize the history of this place.
They turned it into a heroic myth.
We have taken the gladiator, who was overwhelmingly a coerced slave, a prisoner of war, or a terrified, condemned man with no options, and we have magically transformed him into a noble icon of warrior virtue.
We made them into superheroes.
We have erased the agonizing fear of the Santa Libera. We have erased the cruelty of gamblers betting on a man's life. We have erased 19-year-olds breaking down under the psychological weight of state-sanctioned murder.
All of the grit is gone.
We replaced all of that with a soaring musical soundtrack and a hero who fights for freedom. It makes us feel comfortable. It allows us to consume the aesthetics of the Colosseum without confronting the profound horror of what actually happened there.
Over 400,000 human beings died in that sand over the course of 5 centuries. 400,000. And not a single one of their names is carved into those ancient walls. The building remembers exactly how it was built, but it has completely erased the memory of the people it was built to consume.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. We look back at the ancient Romans with this sense of smug modern superiority. We judge them for being barbaric enough to treat human destruction as a spectator sport. But ask yourself this. When we actively sanitize the brutality of history, when we deliberately erase the suffering, the smells, and the fear, just so we can package it, sell it back to ourselves, and consume it as comfortable entertainment, are we really that fundamentally different from the Roman crowd demanding clean, freshly raked sand before the next bout begins? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the myths you have been sold, keep looking beneath the surface, and we will see you next time.